The air in the lawyer's office was thick with a silence that screamed louder than any shout. It was a cold, sterile silence, broken only by the rustle of papers as Mr. Henderson, the family attorney, cleared his throat. My brother, David, sat stiffly to my left, his face a mask of practiced solemnity. My sister, Clara, across from me, fiddled with the cuff of her perfectly tailored suit, barely sparing me a glance. And I, Sarah, sat there, a woman of 30, successful in my own right as a software engineer, yet feeling every inch the invisible daughter. As per the last will and testament of Thomas Andrew Miller, Mr. Henderson began, his voice a low monotone. All assets, properties, and holdings are to be divided equally between his beloved son, David Miller, and his beloved daughter, Clara Miller. He paused, adjusting his glasses, then continued, with the exception of the family summer house in Aspen, which is bequeathed solely to David, and the extensive art collection, which goes to Clara. There it was, the words I dreaded, yet secretly expected. My stomach plummeted, a familiar, sickening lurch. Not a single mention of my name, not a single, solitary dime, or even a cherished family trinket. It was as if I simply didn't exist. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, like you're constantly fighting for a place that was never truly yours, then you know this feeling. It's a chilling validation of every childhood whisper, every sidelong glance, every time you were made to feel less than. And let me tell you, being officially disinherited by your own father, in front of your seemingly perfect siblings, takes that feeling to a whole new level. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the definitive, undeniable proof of my utter exclusion. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. But I forced myself to remain still, to keep my expression neutral. David smirked, a quick, almost imperceptible twitch of his lips. Clara finally looked at me, her eyes devoid of sympathy, a flicker of triumph dancing within them. They had known, of course, they were always the favored ones, the real children, while I was something else. "Are there any questions?" Mr. Henderson asked, finally looking at me, perhaps noticing the unnatural stillness in my posture. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and demand an explanation, but the words caught in my throat, tangled with decades of suppressed pain and confusion. Instead, a quiet, almost imperceptible no escaped my lips. David, ever the dutiful son, spoke up. "No, Mr. Henderson. I think everything is quite clear." Clara nodded in agreement. The meeting concluded, a blur of legal formalities and polite goodbyes. I walked out of that office building into the bustling city streets, feeling utterly disoriented, like an alien in my own skin. The vibrant sounds of traffic, the laughter of passers-by, it all felt distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. My entire life, I had been trying to earn a place in that family. My father, Thomas Miller, a stoic and successful real estate magnate, had always been distant, preoccupied with his business and doting on David and Clara. My mother, Eleanor, a graceful socialite, mirrored his affections, showering my siblings with praise and attention while I received polite indifference. I remember my 8th birthday. David got a new bike, even though his birthday was months away, and Clara received a pearl necklace because she'd done well in her piano recital. My gift, a meticulously chosen book on advanced mathematics, presented with a crisp, "You're so good with numbers, Sarah, you'll go far." No fanfare, no special celebration. Just a practical acknowledgement of my perceived academic talent, which seemed to be the only thing they could latch onto. It wasn't a bad gift, but it was emblematic of their approach to me: useful, analytical, but devoid of warmth or genuine connection. Growing up, David was the athletic golden boy, Clara the artistic prodigy. I was just Sarah, the quiet one, the bookish one, the one who excelled in school without needing their help, and perhaps, without needing their help, I somehow became less deserving of their love. Their praise for David and Clara was effusive, public. My achievements were met with a nod, a brief acknowledgement, and then a quick change of subject. "Oh, Sarah got into Stanford. That's nice, dear. But David just closed a big deal at his firm. Clara's art piece won an award. Wonderful, Sarah. Did you finally get that promotion? It was always a comparison, always a subtle dismissal. I tried so hard to be noticed, to be loved. I'd bring home perfect report cards, volunteer for every family chore, even try to join in David's sports or Clara's art projects, only to be met with polite amusement or, worse, outright exclusion. "Oh, Sarah, you're not really the athletic type," David would say. "Your hands are too steady for painting," Clara would remark, barely looking up from her canvas. I poured myself into my studies, then into my career. I became fiercely independent, financially secure, and built a fulfilling life for myself outside the family mansion. But that yearning for their approval, that desperate desire to be seen as a true member of the family, never truly faded. Every holiday, every family gathering was a fresh wound, a reminder of my peripheral status. I was always there, present in body, but invisible in spirit. My father's illness had been sudden, a massive heart attack that took him quickly. In the flurry of hospital visits and funeral arrangements, I had tried to step up, to be the practical, organized one. I offered to handle logistics, manage visitors, anything to feel useful, to feel needed. My mother, consumed by grief, seemed to lean on David and Clara for emotional support, while directing me to practical tasks, keeping me at a distance. "Sarah, can you coordinate the catering? Clara is too upset to deal with it. David needs to focus on comforting his mother. Sarah, can you handle the floral arrangements?" I was the fixer, the logistical support, never the one to be comforted, never the one whose grief mattered as much. And now, the will, a final, definitive statement from the grave. "You are not one of us. You never were." The shock began to wear off, replaced by a cold, burning anger, not just anger at my father, or David and Clara, but anger at myself. Anger for allowing myself to hope, for clinging to the illusion that one day they would see me, truly see me, and accept me. If you've ever been cast aside by the people who are supposed to be your safe harbor, let me tell you, that anger can be a powerful, albeit painful, motivator. I walked aimlessly for what felt like hours, the city a blur around me. Finally, I hailed a cab and gave the address of Emily's apartment. Emily, my best friend since college, was the one person who truly knew me, understood my complicated family dynamics, and always offered a clear, unbiased perspective. She was my anchor, my reality check. When she opened the door, her eyes widened. "Sarah, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I stumbled inside, barely coherent, and collapsed onto her sofa. "He did it. He actually did it. I'm out of the will. Completely." Emily's face crumpled with sympathy. She sat beside me, putting an arm around my shaking shoulders. "Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I know how much you wanted things to be different." I felt the dam break. Tears, hot and furious, streamed down my face. Decades of suppressed hurt, disappointment, and rejection poured out. Why? Why? What did I ever do? I tried so hard. I was always there for them. Always the responsible one. Always the one they could count on to fix things. And this is what I get. Nothing. Emily held me tightly, letting me cry until the storm subsided. When my sobs finally quieted to ragged breaths, she pulled back, looking at me with a fierce intensity. "Sarah, listen to me. This isn't about you. This is about them. Their insecurities. Their messed up dynamics. Your father wasn't just being cruel. He was making a statement. But that statement says nothing about your worth." "But why me?" I whispered, my voice raw. Why was I always the odd one out? The outsider? David and Clara were always treated like royalty. What makes me so different? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Emily mused, her brow furrowed in thought. And honestly, Sarah, with a family like yours, sometimes the answer is hidden deeper than you think. There's always been something off. The way your mother would get tense when your childhood was brought up. The way your father would change the subject if anyone mentioned old family photos. It always felt like there was a secret, a quiet undercurrent to their dynamic with you. Her words hit me. A secret. It wasn't a new thought, not entirely. There had always been little things, small inconsistencies that I had dismissed over the years. My mother's sudden change of topic whenever I asked about my early childhood photos. The way my father would stiffen if an old friend mentioned when you first came to town. The fact that David and Clara, despite being only a few years older, sometimes talked about my arrival in the family in a way that felt detached, almost like I was an acquisition, not a birth. I remembered Aunt Susan, my father's estranged sister, who had visited once when I was a child. She had looked at me with an odd, knowing sadness and whispered, "You have your mother's eyes, but not Eleanor's." My mother had immediately ushered Aunt Susan away, her face tight with anger, and Aunt Susan never visited again. At the time, I dismissed it as family eccentricity. Now, it echoed in my mind like a siren. Do you think there's something they're not telling me?" I asked. A new, chilling thought taking root. Emily hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Honestly, Sarah, yes, there's always been a feeling, a vibe, that something was off, especially with how different you are from David and Clara. Not just in personality, but almost physically. They're both fair-haired and blue-eyed. Classic Miller traits. You have that darker hair, those hazel eyes. Of course, genetics are funny, but..." She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. The idea was terrifying, yet exhilarating, a hidden truth. It would explain everything, the coldness, the exclusion, the disinheritance. It would give a reason, however painful, to the lifelong feeling of being an outsider. "What do I do, Em?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "How do I even begin to look for something like that?" "Well," Emily said, her practical side kicking in. "Start with the obvious, birth certificates, family records, old photos. If you can get your hands on them, see if anything feels off. And if you hit a wall, maybe it's time to talk to someone who specializes in these kinds of things. A private investigator, perhaps, or even a genealogist." The thought of delving into such a deep family secret was daunting. It meant confronting my mother directly, perhaps even alienating my father if he was still alive. It meant ripping open old wounds and potentially shattering the last vestiges of the family illusion I had clung to. But what was the alternative to live with the gnawing uncertainty, the constant question mark over my own identity? To accept that my father's last act was to erase me? "No," I said, a new resolve hardening my voice. "I can't live like this anymore. I need to know. I need the truth. Whatever it is, I deserve to know why I was cast out." And that, my friends, was the turning point. The disinheritance wasn't the end of my story. It was the unexpected beginning. It was the moment the universe handed me a giant, flashing neon sign that said, "Look deeper." The sting of rejection was still fresh, but now, it was accompanied by a powerful, unyielding curiosity. My father's will, intended to erase me, had instead ignited a fire within me, a fire that would not rest until the truth, however shocking, was finally brought to light. This was the start of the unraveling, the first tentative step into a labyrinth of family secrets, where the shocking truth about my birth lay hidden, waiting to change everything I thought I knew about myself. The revelation of being disinherited was a profound shock. But Emily's suggestion that there might be a deeper secret, a hidden truth about my birth, resonated with a chilling clarity. It was like 1,000 scattered puzzle pieces of my life suddenly began to click into place, hinting at a larger, more coherent, yet utterly devastating picture. The constant feeling of being an outsider, the subtle digs, the lack of genuine warmth, it all seemed to point to something more fundamental than just a personality clash. If you've ever had that gut feeling that something isn't right, that there's a missing piece to your own story, then you know the frantic energy that consumes you. It's a need to know, a primal urge for truth. Even if that truth promises to dismantle everything you've ever believed, for me, that urge became a relentless drive. The first person I approached, naturally, was my mother, Eleanor. I went to the family mansion, the place that had always felt more like a gilded cage than a home. The air was still thick with the recent grief of my father's passing. But beneath it, I could sense her usual emotional distance, perhaps even a subtle triumph. "Mom," I began, my voice carefully modulated, trying to suppress the tremor of apprehension. "I need to talk to you about Dad's will, and about some other things." She looked up from her teacup, her expression a delicate blend of fragility and annoyance. "Sarah, darling, we've been over this. Your father's wishes were clear. It's a difficult time for everyone. Let's not make it harder. It's about more than the will." "Mom," I pressed on, my heart pounding. "It's about why I've always felt like I don't quite belong. Why I was always treated differently from David and Clara." Her composure faltered, just for a split second. Her eyes flickered away, a telltale sign I'd learned to recognize over the years. It was the same look she'd get whenever Aunt Susan was mentioned, or when old photos from before I was born came out. "Don't be ridiculous, Sarah," she said, her voice sharp, regaining her composure. "You are our daughter. Your father loved all his children equally. You were always more independent, more, shall we say, self-sufficient." The word self-sufficient was spat out like an accusation. Rather than a compliment, it was a thinly veiled jab, reminding me that my independence was viewed as a failing, not a strength. Was I adopted? "Mom," the words escaped before I could stop them, raw and direct. Her teacup clattered in its saucer. Her face went pale, then flushed a furious red. "How dare you, Sarah? What kind of monstrous suggestion is that, of course? You were born in this family, just like your siblings, who has been putting these absurd ideas in your head." Her reaction was explosive, disproportionate. It wasn't the calm, indignant denial of an innocent person. It was the frantic, over-the-top defensiveness of someone caught in a lie. My suspicions solidified into a chilling certainty. "Mom, I just want the truth," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to understand why I was completely disinherited, why I've always felt like an outsider." "The truth is," she hissed, leaning forward, her voice suddenly low and venomous, "your father never quite understood you, Sarah. You were difficult, always questioning, always challenging, unlike David and Clara, who were simply easier to love. And now you're just being greedy, trying to pick apart your dead father's wishes." The conversation devolved into a familiar pattern, her accusations, her victimhood, her gaslighting. She called me ungrateful, selfish, cold. Every insult she could conjure, she hurled at me, clearly aiming to wound, to break me down as she always had, but this time. Her words felt hollow. They were just noise, confirming my deepest fear she wasn't going to give me the truth willingly. I left the mansion feeling both defeated and strangely empowered. Defeated by her unyielding wall of denial, but empowered by the certainty that my instincts were right. The truth was out there, hidden beneath layers of deceit and emotional manipulation. The next logical step was to look for official documents. My birth certificate. I knew where my mother kept important papers, a heavy, ornate safe in her study. Accessing it would be tricky. She was rarely away from the house for long, and it was a guarded place. I confided in Emily again, explaining my mother's explosive reaction. "She's lying, Em. I know it. Her face, her voice. It was too much. I need to find my birth certificate." "That's a huge step, Sarah," Emily said, her brow furrowed. "Are you sure you want to go down this road? What if what you find is even more painful than what you imagine?" "I can't not know," I replied, the words a desperate plea. "I can't live with this question mark hanging over my entire life. Not anymore. I deserve to know who I am and why I was treated this way." Over the next few weeks, I meticulously planned. I remembered my mother's schedule, her weekly bridge game with her friends. It was the only time she was reliably out of the house for a few hours. I knew the safe's combination, a series of numbers based on my parents' anniversary, something I'd stumbled upon years ago when I was a curious child. The irony was not lost on me. The combination to the safe holding my deepest secret was based on the very relationship that was proving to be a lie. The day came, my heart hammered against my ribs as I drove to the mansion. The gates were open, a small victory. I let myself in. The silence of the large house amplified by my nervous breathing. I went straight to my mother's study, a room I rarely entered, filled with the scent of old paper and her expensive perfume. The safe was tucked discreetly behind a large painting. My hands trembled as I spun the dial, entering the familiar numbers. The heavy door clicked open with a soft thud. Inside, neatly stacked, were my parents' marriage certificate, property deeds, old financial statements, and a small faded box labeled Family Records. My fingers shook as I pulled out the box, beneath stacks of old tax documents and insurance policies. I found it, my birth certificate. It looked official, crisp, but something immediately felt off. The date of birth was mine. The names of my parents were listed as Thomas Andrew Miller and Eleanor Miller, but the hospital name, it wasn't the prestigious private hospital David and Clara had been born in, the one my mother always boasted about. This was a smaller, less-known community hospital in a different part of the state. Almost an hour away, my eyes scanned the document again. Everything seemed in order, but the discrepancy gnawed at me. Why would they go to a different hospital for my birth? It seemed illogical for a family of their stature. And then I noticed it, a barely perceptible crease, a faint discoloration on the bottom corner of the certificate. It looked almost like a faint stamp, or an alteration. Beneath the birth certificate, I found a small, unmarked envelope. My name, Sarah Miller, was scrawled on it in my father's distinct handwriting. Inside was a single, folded document. It wasn't a will or a letter. It was an adoption decree. My breath hitched. The words blurred before my eyes. This certifies that the child Sarah, born, my birth date, is hereby adopted by Thomas Andrew Miller and Eleanor Miller. The name of my birth mother was redacted, but the father's name was clearly stated, Michael Evans. Michael Evans. The name sent a jolt through me. It wasn't my father. My father wasn't Michael Evans. I felt a cold dread wash over me, quickly followed by a searing, white-hot rage. Adopted. All these years, all the subtle rejections, the casual dismissals, the feeling of being different, it all made a horrifying, sickening sense. I wasn't just treated differently, I was different. They had lied. My entire life was built on a foundation of deceit. My hand trembled as I put the adoption decree back in the envelope. I found another smaller, even more hidden compartment in the safe. Tucked inside was a tiny, worn velvet box. I opened it. Inside, on a faded silk lining, lay a delicate silver locket. It was tarnished with age, but unmistakable. Engraved on the back, almost too small to see, were the initials M.E. plus L.D. Michael Evans, L.D. Who was L.D.? My birth mother, perhaps. And then, underneath the locket, was a single yellowed photograph. It was a picture of a young woman, strikingly beautiful, with dark hair and hazel eyes that mirrored my own. She was smiling, a radiant, open smile, and standing beside her, his arm around her, was a younger version of my father, not the stoic, distant man I knew, but a smiling, relaxed man, looking genuinely happy. They looked in love. My mind reeled. What was going on? Michael Evans was my birth father, but this photo, my father, Thomas Miller, with this woman who looked so much like me, and the initials L.D. on the locket. A new, more terrifying possibility began to form. Was it possible I wasn't adopted, but that Michael Evans was a placeholder, a lie to cover a deeper truth? Was it possible that this woman in the photo, L.D., was my biological mother, and my father, Thomas Miller, was not just my adoptive father, but my biological father, who had then married Eleanor and passed me off as hers to hide some secret? The thought was scandalous, unthinkable, yet suddenly it felt chillingly plausible. It would explain the decades of distance, the resentment, the constant feeling of being a secret they needed to keep. The implications were staggering. If Thomas Miller was my biological father, it meant Eleanor had known this all along. She had raised me knowing I wasn't her biological child, perhaps even knowing I was the result of her husband's infidelity, or a secret from his past. It would explain her coldness, her subtle cruelty, her deep-seated resentment. It would explain the disinheritance not as a rejection of an adopted child, but as a final, cruel punishment for a living, breathing secret. I quickly replaced the documents and the locket, closing the safe, making sure everything was exactly as I found it. I practically ran out of the house, my head spinning. The world outside felt different now. The very ground beneath my feet felt unstable. My identity, my entire history, had just been ripped apart. The rage, previously burning, now became a cold, precise instrument. This wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't just about being left out of a will. This was about a lifetime of lies, a stolen identity, a profound betrayal at the hands of the people who were supposed to protect and love me. And I was going to unearth every single detail. I was going to find out who LD was, and I was going to make them face the truth they had so meticulously hidden. This was no longer a quest for understanding. It was a righteous pursuit of justice. The adoption decree and that single photograph became my new reality. Every detail I'd ever questioned, every subtle slight, every whispered comment about my difference now made chilling, heartbreaking sense. I wasn't just disinherited. I was a living, breathing secret, meticulously concealed for decades. And the woman in the photo, with my eyes and my dark hair, the LD on the locket, was the key to unlocking the entire, twisted truth. If you've ever felt the ground completely fall out from under you, where every memory, every childhood story, every familial bond is suddenly cast in a sinister new light, then you understand the disorientation that gripped me. My mind raced, piecing together fragments, searching for answers in the vast, empty spaces of my past. My first thought, after the initial shock, was the profound betrayal, not just from my father, who I now suspected was my biological parent, but from my mother, Eleanor. She had raised me, looked me in the eye, and knowingly perpetuated this lie. The coldness, the constant feeling of being less than. It wasn't just my imagination. It was the calculated distance from a woman forced to accept a child that wasn't hers. A child who was a living testament to her husband's secret. My next step was obvious: find out who LD was, the initials. Paired with Michael Evans, my supposed birth father's name on the adoption papers, and the unsettling photo of my father with this mysterious woman. Suggested a complex web. I started by searching publicly available records, old obituaries, newspaper archives, anything related to my family's past, particularly focusing on the years leading up to my birth. I spent countless nights hunched over my laptop, databases open, my apartment lit only by the glow of the screen. I started with my father's younger years, looking for any connections, any names that might align with LD or Michael Evans. It was tedious, painstaking work, often leading to dead ends. But I was driven by a burning need for answers. I recalled a conversation with my father's older sister, Aunt Susan, years ago. The one who'd hinted about my eyes not being Eleanor's. Aunt Susan had been ostracized by my mother, Eleanor, for reasons never fully explained. But it was always implied that Susan was difficult and dramatic now. I suspected it was because she knew too much, unfortunately. Aunt Susan had passed away a few years prior, taking her secrets with her. However, remembering Aunt Susan led me down a different path. I vaguely recalled her mentioning an old family friend, a woman named Martha who used to live near my father's family homestead in a small town upstate. Martha had been a close confidant of my paternal grandmother, and perhaps someone who might know about old family secrets. It was a long shot, but I was desperate. I found an old address for Martha through a convoluted search of public records and made the long drive upstate. The small town was quaint, steeped in history, a world away from the polished affluence of my upbringing. Martha, a spry woman in her late 80s, lived in a charming, slightly overgrown cottage. When I introduced myself, her eyes, sharp and knowing, widened in surprise. "Sarah Miller. My goodness, you look so much like... Well, come in, dear, come in." She settled me into a worn armchair, offering me a cup of herbal tea. I explained, carefully, that I was researching my family history and had some questions about my father's early life. I casually mentioned the strange hospital on my birth certificate, the feeling of being an outsider, and then, with a deep breath, showed her the photograph of my father with the mysterious LD. Martha picked up the photo, her hand trembling slightly, her gaze softened, a distant sadness clouding her eyes. "Oh, bless her heart, Louisa Davies." My heart leaped into my throat. Louisa Davies, L.D., the name, spoken aloud, suddenly felt real, tangible. Who was she? Martha, I asked. My voice barely a whisper. Martha sighed. A long, weary sound. Louisa was Thomas's first love. They were inseparable, back in high school, and through college. Everyone thought they'd marry. She was vibrant, kind, full of life. Everyone loved Louisa. What happened to her? I pressed, my mind racing. Martha looked at me, a profound pity in her gaze. It was a tragedy, dear, a terrible car accident. Just after she graduated from college, Thomas was devastated, absolutely heartbroken. He never truly got over her. A car accident. My mind connected the dots with horrifying speed. And did she have a child? Martha. Around the time of her death, Martha's eyes welled up. Oh, Sarah, you know, don't you? Yes, she did. A little girl, born just a few weeks before the accident. A beautiful baby girl, with her mother's dark hair and hazel eyes. Everyone said she looked just like Louisa. Thomas. Thomas was beside himself. He wanted to raise her, of course. He loved Louisa so much. But Eleanor, she trailed off, shaking her head. Eleanor was a different kind of woman, very traditional, from a very prominent family. She'd always had her eye on Thomas. She saw an opportunity when Louisa passed. Thomas was so vulnerable, so lost. Eleanor swooped in. She offered him comfort, stability. She offered him a ready-made family, with David and Clara, who were just toddlers at the time. So Eleanor agreed to raise me, I asked. A bitter taste in my mouth. Martha looked away, her voice softer. Not exactly, dear. The family rumor was. Eleanor didn't want Louisa's child. She saw her as a constant reminder of Thomas's past, of the woman he truly loved. She insisted the baby be given up for adoption if she was to marry Thomas. But Thomas, he couldn't bear it. He loved that baby. He loved you. My breath hitched again. So, he adopted me. Yes, Martha confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. He arranged a private adoption, legally adopted you with Eleanor. But it was always a secret. Eleanor demanded it. She couldn't have anyone knowing you weren't truly hers, or that you were Louisa's child. She feared it would stain her reputation, or make her look second best. She made Thomas promise to keep it a secret. She even fabricated a new birth certificate, using a different hospital and a generic Michael Evans as the father, to hide the truth. The pieces slammed into place with a sickening thud. The different hospital, the altered birth certificate, Michael Evans, the disinheritance, Eleanor's coldness, David and Clara's subtle digs, the years of feeling like an outsider. It all converged into one horrifying, undeniable truth. My father, Thomas Miller, was not just my adoptive father. He was my biological father, and my biological mother, Louisa Davies, had died tragically shortly after my birth. Eleanor, my adoptive mother, had agreed to raise me, but only under the condition that my true parentage be hidden, and that I would essentially be treated as a secret, a living ghost of my father's past love. My disinheritance wasn't about me being unworthy. It was Eleanor's final, venomous act of revenge, ensuring that Louisa's child would receive nothing, even from Thomas's estate. It was a complete and utter emotional erasure. The wave of emotions that hit me was overwhelming profound grief for the mother I never knew. A woman who looked so much like me, who died so young, followed by a searing, white-hot rage at Eleanor for her cruelty, her deception, and her decades-long campaign to make me feel like I didn't belong, and finally, a heartbreaking understanding of my father's distance. He had loved my mother, Louisa. He had kept me, perhaps out of love, but lived under the iron fist of Eleanor's control, forced to deny my true identity. His distance wasn't personal rejection, but a reflection of his own guilt, his own compromised position within his marriage. But why the disinheritance? Martha, I asked, my voice raw with emotion. If he was my biological father, if he loved me, why nothing in the will? Martha shook her head sadly. Oh, Sarah, dear, Thomas tried. He always tried to make things right. He left a secret codicil to his will, or so I heard from your grandmother before she passed, a separate document, detailing a trust or a specific asset meant for you, something Eleanor couldn't touch. He always felt so guilty. He wanted you to be taken care of. A secret codicil, a hidden document. This was it. The key piece of the puzzle. My father had tried to ensure I was provided for, despite Eleanor's machinations, but it must have been hidden, destroyed, or simply overlooked. He hid it, I whispered. The realization dawning on me, he must have hidden it somewhere outside the official will, and Eleanor or David and Clara must have found it, or destroyed it. Martha's eyes darted nervously. I don't know the details, dear, only that he spoke of it, a small, separate document. He wanted to make sure you were secure. I thanked Martha, my mind already racing, plotting my next move. I had the truth now, the painful, liberating truth. My biological mother was Louisa Davies, and my biological father was Thomas Miller. The adoption was a sham, a legal maneuver to appease Eleanor and bury a scandalous secret. And my disinheritance wasn't just cruel, it was a criminal act, potentially involving the concealment or destruction of a legitimate part of my father's will. This was no longer just about family drama. This was about justice. This was about reclaiming my identity, honoring the memory of Louisa, and holding Eleanor and my siblings accountable for decades of lies and emotional abuse. The journey back home was a blur. My grief for Louisa was profound, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective anger. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, my dark hair, my hazel eyes, so like Louisa's, so unlike Eleanor's and my siblings. I was her daughter. I was Thomas's daughter. And they had tried to erase me, but they had failed. The truth, once hidden, was now revealed. And I would use that truth as a weapon. I was going to find that secret codicil. I was going to expose their lies. And I was going to fight for everything they had stolen from me, not just money, but my identity, my past, and my rightful place in the world. The calm before the storm was over. The storm was here. The drive back from Martha's quaint cottage was a blur. My mind a tempest of emotions. Grief for Louisa, the mother I never knew, intertwined with a searing. Righteous fury at Eleanor and the years of calculated deception. The adoption decree, the fabricated birth certificate, the hidden locket, and Martha's whispered confession of a secret codicil. It was all too much. Yet it illuminated everything. I wasn't an anomaly. I was a victim of a decades-long conspiracy to erase my true identity and lineage. If you've ever felt the cold, hard weight of betrayal settle deep in your bones, where every past slight suddenly makes horrific sense, then you understand the burning desire for justice that consumed me. This wasn't just about money, or even just about being acknowledged. This was about reclaiming my very self, about honoring the memory of Louisa, and about holding accountable the people who had stolen my truth. My first call, after leaving Martha, was to Emily. I recounted everything, the real story of Louisa Davies, my biological mother, my father Thomas's secret love, the adoption under duress from Eleanor, and the chilling detail about the fabricated birth certificate and the secret codicil. Emily listened, her gasps and exclamations punctuating my furious narration. "Sarah, this is unbelievable," she finally said, her voice filled with a mix of shock and outrage. "Your mother is a monster, and your father, he tried to do right by you, even under her thumb." "He did," I agreed, a raw ache in my chest. "And I'm going to find that codicil. I'm going to make sure his last wish, his attempt to care for me, isn't thwarted by her spite." Emily, ever the pragmatist, immediately shifted into action mode. "Okay, so the secret codicil, where would he hide something like that? Something Eleanor couldn't easily find or destroy." We brainstormed. My father was meticulous, private. He hated banks, preferring to keep important documents at home in various hidden spots. He also had a small, private study at his real estate office, a place he considered his sanctuary. "I need to get back into his study at the house," I told Emily. "And I need to search the office, discreetly. And you need legal counsel, Sarah," Emily insisted. "This isn't just a family dispute anymore. This is potentially fraud, concealment of documents, maybe even elder abuse if Eleanor manipulated your father's will while he was ill. You need a bulldog of a lawyer." She was right. I researched highly recommended probate attorneys specializing in contested wills and complex family estates. I found Mr. Davies, a formidable, no-nonsense lawyer with a reputation for tenacity. I scheduled a preliminary consultation, armed with the adoption decree, the locket, the photograph, and Martha's testimony. The meeting with Mr. Davies was intense. I laid out the entire convoluted story, watching his expression shift from polite skepticism to grim seriousness as I revealed each piece of evidence. When I showed him the adoption decree and explained my suspicion about the fabricated birth certificate and the missing codicil, his eyes narrowed. "Ms. Miller," he said, leaning back in his chair, "this is an extraordinary claim. If proven, it completely alters the landscape of your father's estate. The fact that your biological father is also your adoptive father, and that this was concealed, adds layers of complexity. And the mention of a secret codicil is intriguing. People often try to make provisions for family members who they know might be excluded in the main will, especially in contentious family situations. If it exists, finding it is crucial. He advised me to be cautious. Do not confront your mother or siblings with this information yet. Do not give them any reason to destroy evidence or further conceal assets. We need to build a rock-solid case. Start with searching the house and his office for this codicil, or any other hidden documents. We can also subpoena medical records from that other hospital if necessary, to confirm the original birth." His words fueled my determination. The hunt for the codicil became my singular focus. A few days later, I drove to the family mansion. My mother was out at a charity luncheon, a perfectly timed window. I had a key. Despite being disinherited, I was still family. The house, usually bustling with staff, felt eerily quiet. My heart pounded as I slipped inside. A strange mix of intruder and rightful inhabitant. I started with my father's home study. It was a masculine room, filled with leather-bound books, old maps, and a faint scent of pipe tobacco. I methodically searched every drawer, every shelf, every hidden compartment I knew of. I ran my hands along the spines of books, hoping to feel a loose panel. Nothing. Then I remembered a peculiar habit of his. My father was obsessed with rare stamps. He had a custom-built display case in his study, filled with albums. I rarely paid attention to it, but he would sometimes disappear into his study for hours, just admiring them. Could he have hidden something among them? I carefully opened the stamp cabinet. It was heavy, solid oak. As I ran my fingers along the back panel, I felt it, a faint seam, almost imperceptible. With a renewed surge of adrenaline, I pressed along the seam, and a small, narrow section of the back panel swung inward, revealing a hidden compartment. My breath hitched. Inside, there were no stamps. Instead, there was a small, dusty wooden box. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. It was old, worn, but surprisingly light. I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, rolled-up document, secured with a thin, brittle ribbon. It looked old, almost fragile, and beneath it, a small, worn, leather-bound journal. My eyes immediately fixated on the rolled document. With trembling fingers, I untied the ribbon and unrolled it. It was indeed a codicil. The heading read, in my father's precise, elegant handwriting, confidential codicil to the last will and testament of Thomas Andrew Miller. My eyes scanned the contents, my heart hammering against my ribs. It stipulated that due to extraordinary and deeply personal circumstances, a separate trust fund, containing a significant portion of his privately held stocks and bonds, was to be established for my beloved daughter, Sarah, who has always been a special part of my life, despite the appearances. The language was formal, yet held a heartbreaking tenderness. It was witnessed by two of his long-time, trusted business associates, both now deceased. The date on it was a year before his death, suggesting he had meticulously planned this. Tears blurred my vision. He had tried to protect me, to provide for me, knowing Eleanor would exclude me. This wasn't just money, it was a final, desperate act of love and acknowledgement from a father who had been forced to deny me for so long. Beneath the codicil, the journal, it was my father's personal diary, meticulously kept, detailing his private thoughts, I opened it to a random page. His handwriting filled the lines. A raw, emotional confession. January 15th, 1993. Eleanor insists. It breaks my heart. Louisa's child, my Sarah, must remain a secret. She says it's the only way we can move forward, for the sake of David and Clara, for her family's reputation. But every time I look at Sarah's eyes, I see Louisa. The guilt is a constant companion. How can I deny my own flesh and blood? April 7, 2005. Sarah is so bright, so capable. She reminds me so much of Louisa's spirit. But Eleanor's resentment grows with every achievement. She sees Sarah as a threat, a living reminder of my past. I try to protect her, but Eleanor's grip is too strong. I must make amends. I must ensure Sarah is taken care of. Regardless of what Eleanor tries to do with the main will, I will find a way. A secret way. The words were a dagger to my heart, yet also a balm. They confirmed everything Martha had said. My father did love me. He did try. He was just too weak, too trapped by Eleanor's will and the societal pressures of his world. The disinheritance was indeed Eleanor's doing, a final, cruel act of revenge against Louisa. Enacted through me. I carefully replaced the journal and the codicil in the box, re-hid it, and closed the compartment, leaving no trace. I felt a surge of cold, focused determination. This was no longer just about suspicion. It was about irrefutable proof. I called Mr. Davies from my car, my voice trembling with a mixture of grief and triumph. I found it. Mr. Davies, the codicil, and his journal. It confirms everything. His response was immediate and decisive. Excellent, Miss Miller. Do not show anyone. Bring them to my office first thing tomorrow morning. This changes everything. The next morning, Mr. Davies reviewed the codicil and scanned through snippets of the journal. His expression was grim. This is highly significant, Ms. Miller. Not only does the codicil establish your rightful inheritance, but your father's journal clearly documents a lifetime of emotional duress and a deliberate attempt to circumvent an implied hostile influence from your adoptive mother. This gives us grounds to challenge the original will and expose the fabrication of your birth certificate. This is a very strong case. He then laid out the plan. We would file a formal challenge to the will, presenting the codicil as evidence. We would also highlight the fraudulent birth certificate and the journal entries to demonstrate the clear intent of my biological father to provide for me. And the systemic emotional manipulation I had endured, this was going to be a public, messy fight. Your mother and siblings will fight this tooth and nail, Ms. Miller, Mr. Davies warned. They will deny everything. They will try to discredit you. Are you prepared for that? I thought of the years of being invisible, the decades of quiet suffering, the final insult of the disinheritance. I thought of Louisa, the mother I never knew, her memory silenced by Eleanor's cruelty. I thought of my father, trapped and guilt-ridden, trying to do right by me in secret. I'm prepared, Mr. Davies, I said, my voice steady, imbued with a newfound resolve. I've been preparing for this my entire life. They left me out of the will. They stole my identity. Now, they will face the truth. The confrontation was coming. It wouldn't be a quiet family dinner. It would be in a courtroom. Under the harsh glare of legal scrutiny, the hidden document had not only revealed the shocking truth about my birth, but had also ignited a fire within me, transforming the invisible daughter into a formidable opponent. The era of their lives was about to come crashing down. The days leading up to the formal legal challenge were a blur of intense preparation. Mr. Davies, my lawyer, was a whirlwind of strategic planning. We meticulously organized every piece of evidence: the falsified birth certificate, the original adoption decree, the locket, the photograph of Louisa, and most crucially, my father's secret codicil and his deeply personal journal entries. Each document was a nail in the coffin of Eleanor's carefully constructed facade. If you've ever had to stand up to a Goliath, especially when that Goliath is your own family, you know the mix of dread and exhilaration that pulses through you. There were moments of doubt, whispered insecurities asking if I was truly strong enough to face them in open court, to expose such a monumental lie. But then I'd remember Louisa, the mother whose existence had been erased, and my father, whose final act of love had been ruthlessly undermined. Their silenced voices became my fuel. The initial legal filing sent shockwaves through my family. Mr. Davies delivered the papers to Eleanor and my siblings. A formal notification that I was contesting the will, citing concealed documents and challenging my true parentage. Their reaction was exactly as predicted: fury, disbelief, and immediate denial. My mother called, her voice trembling with a manufactured outrage that failed to mask the underlying panic. "Sarah, what is the meaning of this? Have you gone completely mad? This is slander. This is an insult to your father's memory. How dare you drag our family name through the mud like this?" "Mom," I replied, my voice steady, "this is about the truth. The truth you and Dad kept from me my entire life. The truth about Louisa Davies, and the truth about that secret codicil." There was a moment of stunned silence on her end. The mention of Louisa Davies seemed to strip away her practiced indignation. "Louisa, what are you talking about?" "There is no Louisa," she stammered, her voice thin. "You're delusional. This is all a scheme for money." "It's not a scheme, Mom. It's the truth, and I have the proof," I stated. "The adoption decree, Dad's journal, even the faked birth certificate. It's all coming out." Her subsequent tirade was a torrent of accusations I was ungrateful, a liar, a money grubber, trying to dishonor my father's memory. She even threatened to have me committed, claiming I was mentally unstable. I let her rave, listening with a detached calm. Her vitriol, once so potent, now just sounded pathetic. I ended the call, knowing that the battle lines were irrevocably drawn. David and Clara's reactions were more about protecting their inheritance. David, always the shrewd businessman, called with a condescending tone, "Sarah, you're making a huge mistake. This will ruin our family's reputation. And for what, a few extra dollars, you already have a good job. Think about what this will do to Mom." "This isn't about a few extra dollars, David," I countered. "This is about my identity, my inheritance, and the decades of lies." And Mom made her bed when she chose to hide the truth. Clara, the emotional manipulator, sent me tearful texts about how I was destroying the family and breaking Mom's heart. I ignored them. Their attempts to guilt trip and shame me no longer held any power. The legal process began, slow and deliberate, yet each step felt monumental. Mr. Davies filed a motion for discovery, demanding access to all of my father's financial records, digital communications, and any other personal documents. Eleanor's legal team, a formidable firm hired to protect the family's assets and reputation, immediately pushed back, denying everything and attempting to paint me as a disgruntled, greedy relative making baseless claims. The initial court hearing was a tense affair. It wasn't the full trial, but a preliminary motion where both sides presented their arguments. Eleanor sat across the courtroom from me, flanked by David and Clara, all wearing expressions of injured innocence. Her eyes, when they met mine, held a venomous blend of hatred and fear. Mr. Davies, in his opening statement, laid out the core of our argument. We intend to prove that the deceased, Thomas Andrew Miller, made a specific and confidential provision for his biological daughter, Sarah Miller, through a secret codicil. Furthermore, we will present evidence that Ms. Miller's true parentage was deliberately concealed through fraudulent documentation, and that this concealment directly influenced her long-term exclusion from the family, culminating in her disinheritance from the primary will. This is not merely a dispute over assets. It is a quest for truth and justice for a lifetime of deception. Eleanor's lawyer, a slick, arrogant man named Mr. Thorne, countered with aggressive rhetoric. "Your Honor, this is a baseless claim, fueled by greed and a desire to exploit a grieving family. Ms. Sarah Miller is indeed the adopted daughter of Thomas and Eleanor Miller. Her claims of a secret codicil are unsubstantiated fantasy, and her allegations of fraud are nothing short of defamatory. We believe she is attempting to tarnish the reputation of a respectable family and usurp assets to which she has no legal right." Then came the discovery phase. It was a grueling process. We subpoenaed bank records, personal calendars, and correspondence. Eleanor and her lawyers fought us every step of the way, redacting documents, claiming attorney-client privilege, and generally dragging their feet. But Mr. Davies was relentless. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence we needed, was the original hospital birth record, the one that would prove the faked birth certificate. Mr. Davies filed a court order to unseal historical medical records from the small community hospital Martha had mentioned. The hospital, long since closed, had transferred its archives to a central state repository. Days later, a paralegal from Mr. Davies' office called, her voice hushed with excitement. "Ms. Miller, we found it. Your original birth record. It lists your birth mother as Louisa Davies." And then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "And there's a note from the attending physician, mentioning that the biological father, Thomas Miller, was present at the birth." My breath caught. Thomas was there. He had seen Louisa, my biological mother, give birth to me. He had held me. The idea that he had been present, and yet had allowed Eleanor to force him into this deception, cut me to the core. It added a layer of profound sadness to my anger. This was the smoking gun, not just the adoption, but the explicit confirmation that my father, Thomas, was my biological father, present at my birth, before marrying Eleanor and burying the truth. This was proof of premeditated deception, a direct link between my true parentage and the intricate web of lies. Armed with this new evidence, Mr. Davies filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that the evidence overwhelmingly supported our claim and that a full trial might not even be necessary. The judge, a stoic woman with a sharp mind, scheduled an expedited hearing. The tension in the courtroom during that hearing was suffocating. Eleanor looked haggard, her usual composure cracking under the weight of the mounting evidence. David and Clara looked nervous, their whispers frequent and agitated. Mr. Davies presented the original birth record, linking Louisa Davies and Thomas Miller directly to my birth. He then presented the fabricated birth certificate, highlighting the discrepancies. Finally, he brought out the journal. "Your Honor," Mr. Davies' voice resonated through the courtroom. "This journal, written in the deceased's own hand, reveals the true motivation behind the disinheritance and the decades of concealment. It details the undue influence of Eleanor Miller, the conscious decision to fabricate records, and most importantly, the deceased's desperate attempts to make amends for a lifetime of silence through a secret codicil." He then read excerpts from the journal, my father's raw, guilt-ridden confessions about denying his daughter, about Eleanor's demands, about his love for Louisa and his desire to provide for me. The words, echoing in the quiet courtroom, painted a picture of a man torn between his love for a lost woman and his duty to a powerful, unforgiving wife. Eleanor's face drained of all color. David and Clara shifted uncomfortably. Avoiding eye contact with me, their lawyer, Mr. Thorne, tried to object, claiming hearsay, but the judge allowed the journal as evidence of Thomas Miller's state of mind and intent. "And finally, Your Honor," Mr. Davies continued, holding up the preserved codicil, "we present the tangible proof of Thomas Andrew Miller's final, true wishes for his daughter, Sarah, a document he painstakingly hid, knowing it would be challenged by those who wished to see Ms. Miller completely erased from his legacy." He then read the codicil aloud. The words about my beloved daughter, Sarah, who has always been a special part of my life, despite the appearances, ringing through the courtroom. The judge, after listening patiently, turned to Mr. Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, in light of the compelling and highly corroborated evidence presented by the petitioner, including the original birth record, the falsified certificate, the deceased's private journal detailing intent and undue influence, and a duly witnessed codicil, how do you propose to counter these allegations?" Mr. Thorne stammered. Clearly caught off guard by the sheer volume and damning nature of the evidence, he tried to argue that the codicil could be a forgery, that the journal entries were merely sentimental ramblings of a man in decline. But his arguments lacked conviction, crumbling under the weight of the undeniable facts. The judge's gaze was firm. "Mr. Thorne, the evidence presented strongly indicates a long-standing pattern of deception and potentially fraudulent activity related to the petitioner's identity and inheritance. This court finds sufficient grounds to proceed with a full trial, but I strongly advise your clients to consider the gravity of this situation. The concealment of these facts, especially the true parentage, could have severe legal consequences beyond this probate case." Her words were a clear warning. The judge was not only leaning our way, but was hinting at broader implications. Perhaps even criminal charges for fraud or obstruction of justice. Eleanor, who had been staring blankly ahead, suddenly clutched her chest, her face ashen. David and Clara rushed to her side, their expressions a mix of concern for her and stark terror for their own positions. The carefully constructed facade of their lives, built on the foundations of a lie, was crumbling before their very eyes. Walking out of the courtroom that day, I felt a profound sense of vindication. It wasn't a final victory, but it was a crucial turning point. They had left me out of the will, but a hidden document, coupled with the shocking truth about my birth, had now revealed their deceit and shattered their control. The web of lies they had woven for decades was finally unraveling, strand by painful strand. And I was the one holding the needle. The consequences for them, I knew, were only just beginning. The judge's stern words in the courtroom echoed in my mind for days. The concealment of these facts, especially the true parentage, could have severe legal consequences beyond this probate case. That warning was not just for Eleanor and my siblings. It was a promise that the truth, once unleashed, had a momentum all its own. The quiet unraveling of the lies had escalated into a full-blown legal and personal reckoning. This was the final act, the rebirth and reclamation of my identity. If you've ever seen a house of cards finally collapse, you know the sickening yet strangely satisfying sight. For decades, Eleanor had meticulously built a facade of respectability and control, built on the foundations of a lie. Now, under the harsh glare of legal scrutiny, that edifice was crumbling. The immediate aftermath of the hearing was chaotic. Eleanor's lawyers, now realizing the gravity of the situation, pushed for a settlement. They wanted to avoid a full trial, which would mean public exposure of the scandalous truth, my father's secret love, my hidden biological parentage, the falsified documents, and Eleanor's decades of deception. The family name, their most prized possession, was on the line. But I refused to settle for anything less than a full acknowledgement of the truth and my rightful inheritance. This wasn't just about money. It was about justice for Louisa, for my father's hidden love, and for the child whose identity had been stolen. I had been erased once. I would not allow it to happen again. Eleanor, desperate to avoid a public trial, tried one last manipulation. She called me, her voice hoarse, devoid of its usual frosty control, almost pleading. Sarah, please, think about your father's legacy. Think about what this will do to David and Clara. Don't destroy everything for spite. Spite, I retorted, my voice firm. You call decades of lies and emotional abuse spite. You call erasing my mother's memory and disinheriting me legacy. No, Mom, this isn't about spite. This is about truth, and about getting what my father intended for me. She launched into a tirade, accusing me of being heartless, unfeeling, destroying the family. But her words were hollow, lacking their usual sting. Her power over me had evaporated. I calmly reiterated my terms: the codicil to be honored, full acknowledgement of my true parentage, and compensation for the emotional distress and professional resources I had to expend to uncover their lies. The family was in disarray. David, usually so smug, seemed genuinely terrified of the public scandal. His career, built on a polished public image, could be severely damaged. Clara, still focused on her own comfort, seemed less interested in protecting her mother and more concerned with avoiding any personal financial impact. They tried to reason with Eleanor, to convince her to yield, but her pride and ingrained bitterness made her stubbornly resistant. The trial date was set. It was going to be sensational, a juicy scandal for the tabloids, a cautionary tale for the elite. I knew it would be painful, exposing every raw nerve and secret wound in public, but I was ready. I had spent my entire life in their shadow. Now, I would stand in the light, however harsh it might be. However, the day before the trial was set to begin, a surprising development occurred. Mr. Davies called me. Ms. Miller, Eleanor's legal team has contacted us. They are offering to settle, on your exact terms, and they've added a significant sum for damages, conditional on strict confidentiality regarding the details of the family secret. I paused, considering, The confidentiality clause was a sticking point. I wanted the world to know the truth. But then I thought of Louisa. Her memory would be honored through my reclamation of my inheritance and identity, not necessarily through public spectacle, and my father's intent to provide for me would finally be fulfilled. A public trial would undoubtedly be devastating, perhaps even financially ruinous, for Eleanor, David, and Clara, but it would also prolong my own healing process. I consulted with Emily. "It's your decision, Sarah," she said. "What do you need more, public vindication or peace?" The answer, I realized, was peace, my peace. I had endured enough public humiliation and private pain. The real victory wasn't in shaming them, but in liberating myself. "Accept the settlement, Mr. Davies," I told him. "Ensure all the terms are ironclad. I want my father's wishes honored, and I want my identity officially recognized, even if it's just privately within legal documents. And the damages will cover the cost of all the years I spent feeling like less than nothing." The settlement was signed, a thick stack of legal papers that sealed a lifetime of secrets. Eleanor, David, and Clara, looking defeated and sullen, signed their parts, avoiding eye contact with me. It wasn't the fiery courtroom drama I had envisioned, but in its quiet finality, it was more powerful. I had won, not by shouting, but by standing firm on my truth. The aftermath of the settlement was profoundly liberating. I received a substantial inheritance, not just the trust fund stipulated in the codicil, but additional assets that clearly showed my father's true intent to provide for me, and the damages paid by Eleanor. This wealth, however, was secondary to the reclamation of my identity, legally. My true parentage was acknowledged. My biological mother, Louisa Davies, was no longer a secret. My father's final act of love, hidden for so long, was finally brought to light. My relationship with Eleanor and Mark effectively ceased to exist. They withdrew completely, consumed by their shame and the material losses. I made no effort to reach out, nor did they. It was a complete, final break. A necessary severing of a toxic limb. There was sadness, yes, for the family I never truly had, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of relief. My father, in his death, had given me two gifts: the truth and the means to truly live my life. I used a portion of the inheritance to establish a foundation in Louisa Davis's name, supporting young women pursuing arts and sciences, passions she supposedly embodied. It was a way to honor her memory, to give her a legacy she never had the chance to build. My relationship with my father, Thomas, was forever complicated. He had loved me, undeniably, but he had also allowed me to suffer under Eleanor's tyranny for decades. I chose to forgive him, not for his actions, but for his intentions, and for the impossible circumstances he was under. It was a quiet forgiveness, born of understanding rather than forgetting. The most significant change was within myself. The constant gnawing insecurity, the feeling of being an outsider, finally faded. I no longer carried the weight of a hidden past or the burden of unacknowledged pain. I was no longer defined by their rejection, but by my own strength, my own truth, and my own choices. I found newfound joy in my life. My career continued to thrive, my friendships deepened, particularly with Emily, who had been my rock throughout this entire ordeal. I traveled, explored new interests, and built a network of people who loved and respected me for who I was, not for what they could extract from me. This was my chosen family, built on respect, honesty, and genuine affection. To anyone out there who feels like an outsider in their own family, who has been dismissed, devalued, or denied their rightful place, please know this: your worth is not determined by those who fail to see it. Your value is inherent, sacred, and entirely your own sometimes. The most profound acts of self-love involve uncovering uncomfortable truths and challenging the very narratives you've been raised with. It's a terrifying journey, but I promise you, the reclamation of your identity and the embrace of your true self is the most empowering experience you will ever undertake. They left me out of the will, thinking they could erase me, but a hidden document revealed the shocking truth about my birth. And in doing so, it didn't just give me an inheritance, it gave me back myself, And that, my friends, is priceless. Hit that like and subscribe button if you believe in uncovering the truth and reclaiming your power. Drop your stories of personal liberation in the comments below. You never know who you might inspire. And share this video with anyone who needs to hear that their truth matters, no matter how deeply it's buried.